What's up friends, I'm Keshav. Hope you all are doing well and staying creative, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a fat bass line using Ableton Operator. You've already heard the preview, so let's dive right in. So this is a release track of mine called Cerebro-Somatic. This is the somatic mix, sort of minimal bass track, just got a crazy kick pattern, big bass line. And if you want to look at this project in more detail, it is available on my website, doodleside.com, and there's a link in the description below. When it comes to the sound design of this bass line, it's actually quite simple. So I'm using Operator, and this is set to the default algorithm here. You have these different algorithms that affect how the different operators are modulating each other. I'm just using on the default, which is this straight line, meaning each operator is modulating each other in series. So I'm gonna solo the bass line and turn on these operators one by one and show you what they're doing. So the first operator is just the default sine wave and default ADSR. So that's just gonna play this subtone. If you're on laptop or phone speakers, you probably don't hear anything right now. And then we got this operator 2. So this is modulating operator 1. That's what this sounds like. So that's introducing all these like very rich harmonics. So I can turn this down, and now we're back to just the sub sine wave. Turning this up. And as I turn this operator 2 up, that is modulating operator 1 and creating all these nice harmonics. So that's the fatness that we're getting. Next we have operator 3, which is very subtle. It's set to negative 39 dB, so it's not doing a whole lot of modulation. But really, when this operator turns on, it kind of tames the sound a little bit, whereas before I feel it's a little too boomy. But if I turn this, so if I have this off, now with it turned on, I feel like it just tames the low mids, kind of upper bass a little bit. And the last operator, number 4, is giving the bass notes a bit of punch to them, a little bit of transient. Unlike these other 3 operators, which have the sustain and decay fully up, I have this one pulled down quite a bit. The decay is at 351, so that's going to give it a little bit more of that plucky vibe. So let me turn that on and on. Here's without it, and with it. And I'll just turn up this operator 4 to give you an extreme example. So now you can really hear how it's a lot more percussive. So I'm just doing that, but in a much more subtle way. And all these operators are just set to 1 here on chorus, which means that they're playing all in the same octave. And they're all being fed into this low pass filter, which is set to about 2K. It's honestly not doing a whole lot. It's just taking off just a little bit of buzziness on the top end. When it hits some of the higher notes, it gets a little bit buzzy, so I'm just taking that off. And then that whole thing is going into a sidechain, just typical sidechaining to the kick. This EQ is taking out some sub bass, just a dB and a half, because it's just getting a little bit overpowering. And then the last plugin on this chain is this one called Head Crusher, which is one of my favorite plugins. It's a free distortion plugin, which I really like because I think it sounds very rich and musical, and you can be pretty aggressive with it. So that's what I'm doing here. Honestly, I think this really changes the whole sound of the bass. So let me play it without it. And here's with it. Without it. For me, what it does, it really takes out a lot of the resonance in the upper bass and the low mids, and just gives it a nice richness and warmth to it. I really love this plugin, and it's very simple. It's just got a drive knob, output knob, low cut, high cut, and then this tone knob. It's very simple, but I think it sounds wonderful. So that covers the sound design aspect of this bass line. The other part of that is the pattern itself. So I'd like to point out that this bass line is an 8-bar loop, which is, I would say, different from most bass lines you hear in dance music, which are traditionally like either 1, 2, or 4-bar loops. So this one, the bass line pattern and the kick are really just playing off of each other and having this like dialogue, this conversation. That's kind of the feature of this track, in my opinion. So let me just solo the kick and the bass together. To me, this 8 bars of the bass line is like a phrase. It has an intro, and I think the end kind of resolves itself and loops back nicely. If I was trying to make the bass line really the main feature of this track. So to get it like this, I made the pattern for the bass and the kick simultaneously, because again, they need to have that play off of each other. Another thing I want to point out about the bass is just the range of notes here. I'm going all the way from C0 to C1. So I'm using up a whole octave. One way I like to think about bass when writing a bass line is where you'll feel it on your body if you were at like a club or a festival with these huge subwoofers. Different frequencies excite different parts of your body. Down here at C0, which I think is somewhere around like 32 hertz, you really feel that like in the floor, like close to the earth, like it almost feels like the earth is shaking. Then you start going a bit higher in the frequency range from like 40 hertz to 60 hertz, which is like about E to A sharp, and that you feel in your chest. That's like, you know, a really punchy kick drum. It's typically going to be between those frequencies. And then you go even higher in the bass frequencies, and I feel some of that you can almost feel like in your brain. So this is just another approach to writing bass lines, more in terms of how and where it makes you feel rather than how it sounds. Now that I've covered the bass line, let me just briefly cover the kick. Nothing revolutionary going on here. Just have a kick sample. It's going into EQ8, taking out the really like the low end, just cutting that with a high pass, taking some of this muddiness out, the boxiness of the kick at 280 hertz. Just tightens it up. And then I'm emphasizing the high frequencies and adding a bit more presence to the kick. And that's going into an R comp, which frankly I don't really use R compressor anymore. I made this track like a couple of years ago, but now I honestly prefer just like the Ableton compressor. But this is doing the job. Without the R comp, I feel like the kick just sustains a little bit too much. So that kick and bass is grouped and feeding into this SSL G bus right here. And that's doing very little compression just off the top, taming some of the peaks, not really doing a whole lot. Then I have drum bus, which is also fairly subtle. It's only at 7.8%. Then I'm doing a cut at the upper bass, around 150 hertz. You know, because this kick and the bass are just, they're really massive. So you need these cuts in the low mids and the upper bass so you don't end up with a very muddy, resonant, boxy mix. So that's what these little cuts are for. I have that group, and then I have that kick bass group going into this larger group, which has a couple extra elements, which I'll cover very briefly right now. There's this Moog mid bass, which is not really a bass, but I like to think of it as sort of complementing the bass line. So I just stuck it in this group. This thing. And that's just a sound that I made with my Moog, and I have that split into two, so one of them is playing at the normal pitch, another one is pitched up an octave. You can very faintly hear it, just barely. And I just have some saturation, some delay on there, and then I'm really just shaping the frequency range, so it's very much just focused on the mid-range. There's not really any lows, not much like super highs. But yeah, I don't want to focus on that too much since that's not really part of the bass line. And then there's some toms down here, which frankly, they're very subtle. And if I took them out of the track, I'm sure no one would have noticed. So I don't really know why I have that in there. And then so, like I said, this is all being fed into this larger kick bass group. And so on the larger group, I have a tiny bit of glue compression. That's kind of the same thing as what was happening here with this SSL G bus. It's just doing a tiny bit of compression just to take off the top, just a little bit on the peaks. And then there is this Puke Tech, which is just a Pultec, a Waves Pultec emulation, which is adding a lot of like weight to it. So here's without it. It's a lot thinner. And then the bass line and the kick just get this nice like bottom plugin's doing. And if you're wondering what this is doing, it's just an auto filter that's automating a high pass. So in certain moments of the track, just cutting out some of the bass, nothing crazy. And that's partly what I want to show you, is that nothing I'm doing here is overly complicated. You know, even this operator bass line, the sound design behind it is actually fairly simple, and I was just messing around with the knobs, just seeing how it sounded, and came up with that. And there's not much processing going on here too. Just a little bit of this head crusher plugin, which I really like, some saturation, some compression, nothing overly convoluted. So hope you found this helpful. If you did, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace.